right, we are continuing with the brain in this video, and now we are going to look at some other structures, the diencephalon, brainstem, cerebellum, and then the limbic system. So the diencephalon is a deep structure, so it's deep to that cerebrum that we discussed in the previous video, and it's making up the walls of the third ventricle. All right, so we did look at ventricles already, so the diencephalon is making up the walls of that third ventricle. This is where information gets sent to from the rest of the nervous system into the cerebrum, with the exception of the olfaction sense. So our sense of smell does not get sit here, but anything else coming from the nervous system is kind of collecting here in the diencephalon. All right, so brain, spinal cord, peripheral nervous system all end up sending information into this region of the brain. All right, and so output is also going to pass through this region, so returning those responses for whatever motor response needs to happen also passes through these structures. All right, and so the diencephalon is made up of some different structures. Some of these you will learn in lab this week, others you will not. So first up we have the epithalamus. This is making the more posterior roof of that third ventricle. This is also where we're going to find the pineal gland. This is part of our endocrine system, responsible for creating melatonin, which helps us get to sleep and helps regulate our sleep-wake cycle. The thalamus, you will need to know this for lab. It's a pair of oval-shaped structures. Each of them are going to contain a dozen nuclei called thalamic nuclei. And so there's a right and left side, and they're connected by a mass of gray matter called the interthalamic adhesion. All right, and you'll see this on some of the lab models. It'll look like a little dot in the center of more of an oval egg-shaped structure. And then inferior to the thalamus is the subthalamic nucleus. This is part of the basal nuclei. You will learn basal nuclei in lab also. And then sensory information, all of our sensory information except for that sense of smell again, is going to pass through the thalamus before going to the cortex, that cerebral cortex, for processing. All right, so it does need to come through this thalamus first. All right, and so this is a really important structure for all of that processing and kind of relaying this information around. And so some of the peripheral senses from that peripheral nervous system can come through here and actually project directly to the cerebrum. Not all of that information is going to come through that way. But a lot of it will, especially coming from the more peripheral branches of the nervous system. All right, and then again, because this is part of the diencephalon, any responses going back out to the peripheral nervous system are also passing through this thalamus, and so this can help with communication of those motor commands again. And so all of this is really important for that integration step of our nervous system function. All right, and then we also have the hypothalamus, another structure you'll be learning in lab. This is a collection of nuclei that are really involved in the autonomic division of the nervous system, so that automatic system, as well as the endocrine system. If you remember when we did the endocrine system chapter a while back, that hypothalamus is signaling to the pituitary gland to make or store certain substances, right? And so it's going to have that automatic function, the endocrine system function, and it's also really important for memory and emotion as part of the limbic system. So this is actually a very small region of the brain, but it does a lot, like a lot. So even very small structures can do an immense amount of work. So even that pituitary gland, it's really small. It is not a large gland at all, but it's really important, again, for that endocrine system function. All right. So getting into the brainstem now. The brainstem, you'll learn some different parts of this in lab as well. This is directly inferior to the diencephalon. It's also anterior to the cerebellum, and it is part of what's called the reticular activating system, and that is controlling wakefulness, so our sleep-wake cycles again. So it is going to work with that pineal gland for that sleep-wake cycle and our overall circadian rhythm. All right, and so the brainstem is made up of the midbrain, all right, also called the mesencephalon. This is going to make the roof and floor of what's called the cerebral aqueduct, so that was part of that ventricle system, all right. In the tectum region, we have the superior and inferior colliculi. These are on the corpora quadrigemina, which you will be learning the corpora quadrigemina in lab. And there's going to be 4 bumps, and those are the superior and inferior colliculi, but you don't need to know the colliculi for lab, you just need to know the corpora quadrigemina. All right, some other regions, the substantia nigra, this is part of the tegmentum, all right, and so these are going to be really important structures. This is gray matter, and so this is also made up of some of the basal nuclei, and it's called the substantia nigra. So nigra means black, that Latin root word. And so this structure is going to look really, really dark, almost black in real life, because the basal nuclei are going to give it a very dark appearance. They're going to have a lot of melanin in them, so that pigment melanin. So these are going to control some movements, certain emotional responses, as well as the perception of pain and things that feel a lot better. And so interestingly, degeneration of neurons within this section are actually a hallmark feature of Parkinson's disease. And so that movement integration, again, is really, really important, and Parkinson's does start to have some issues with movement. All right, moving on to the anterior side, the cerebral punticles. These connect the cerebrum to the spinal cord, really important for that integration between brain and spinal cord. And then we have the superior cerebral punticle connects the midbrain to the cerebellum. And so those are going to help coordinate sensory representations of visual, auditory, and somatosensory spaces. All right, and so this is really a fancy way of saying that this is coordinating how we are perceiving this different information coming from our eyes, ears, and then skin and touch and stuff like that. Moving on down is the pons. This is the main connecting point with the cerebellum. So there's the middle cerebellar punticle. So this is going to be really, really important. This is made up of axons projecting from the gray matter of the pons into the cerebellar cortex, which we'll talk more about here in a little bit, but there is a cortex of the cerebellum as well as the cerebrum. So this is the main physical connection to the cerebellum and the brainstem, all right? And so they're receiving a lot of information coming from that forebrain being sent to the cerebellum. It also has a lot of nuclei that are really important for respiration, so our breathing. And the pons is also involved in a lot of sensory and motor information coming from the cranial nerves, which is why last week in lab when we learned some of the cranial nerves, they're found on that brainstem. Some of them are on the pons, some of them are a little bit further down on the medulla oblongata, but they are all bringing in information to that brainstem. The medulla oblongata, another structure you'll learn in lab. This is the most inferior part of the brainstem, which will continue into the spinal cord. So it's just kind of transitions right into that spinal cord. There are pyramids that are going to house some motor projection tracts. So this is going to help with that motor movement. So telling the body how to move, whether that's skeletal, smooth, or cardiac muscle tissue. All right, in the more posterior region, the pyramids cross over to the opposite side at a point called the decussation of pyramids. And so that is going to be another important structure, obviously. This crossing helps kind of integrate the motor responses between the two hemispheres. So each hemisphere controls the motor responses to the opposite side of the body. So the right hemisphere is going to control movement on the left-hand side of the body and vice versa. And our vision works very similarly, where right eye vision is coming in and getting processed by the left hemisphere of the brain. All right. So below those pyramids, we have a nucleus called the inferior olive. This functions as a relay point for information on proprioception. And I mentioned proprioception in a previous video, but proprioception, again, is your ability to sense where your body is in physical 3D space. So if you close your eyes, you can still very accurately touch your nose, your ears, your foot, whatever it is, without actually having to see where you're trying to touch. So proprioception is that sensation, that ability to tell where your body is in relation to other objects and stuff like that. All right, so this relay for proprioception, this is going to go into the cerebellum through the inferior cerebellar pundicle, and so with the pons, working together with that pons, it's going to regulate a lot of crucial functions, including cardiovascular and respiratory systems, as well as that proprioception response. And the medulla oblongata, again, is also going to bring in information from the remaining cranial nerves that are not located on the pons. And so it'll work within both motor movement and the autonomic nervous system for, again, cardiovascular and respiratory systems. So here is kind of that diencephalon and brainstem area shown here with this mid-sagittal section. So a lot of the models for lab are going to look like this. So I use this relation that this area right here kind of sort of looks like a seahorse. And so the thalamus would be the eye of the seahorse. The hypothalamus is going to be the nose and mouth of the seahorse. The midbrain or mesencephalon would be the neck of the seahorse. Pons is the belly. Medulla oblongata is the tail. Cerebellum is the fart, basically, of the seahorse. One of the other instructors, that's what one of their kids referred to it as, and it works. And then those colliculi are on that corpora quadrigemina, which is going to be right there. So that seahorse analogy can be really, really helpful there in recognizing some of these structures in lab. And then here is an inferior view of the diencephalon and brainstem. So we're really just seeing the brainstem here. So this is where that pituitary gland would be. This would be the midbrain. Pons right here, medulla oblongata down here. We've got all the cranial nerves coming off different areas of the pons and medulla oblongata. So that's mostly what we're seeing on an inferior view like this. And then this is showing the cerebellar pundicules, so those structures that are kind of helping with that integration and connection between the brainstem and the cerebellum. All right, so let's talk a bit more about the cerebellum now. So this is immediately posterior to that pons. Cerebellum is responsible for coordinating our movements, being able to alternate movements of arms and legs so that we can walk and stuff like that. It helps with balance and posture and our gait. So this is a very ancient structure that has been around in primates and other species for a very, very long time. Humans are the main animal species that has the size of the cerebrum that we do. That's the biggest growth of the brain that humans have had through our evolutionary history, but the cerebellum contains and controls these really essential movements and processes just for general function. So this is a common feature in a lot of different animals. So it's going to have this outer layer of gray matter, which is the cerebellar cortex, and then an inner layer of white matter, in this case called the arbor vitae. This is deep to those cerebellar nuclei. All right, so we've mentioned some of these already, but for lab, the main thing that you're going to need to just recognize here is what is the cerebellum on the brain. All right, so not too bad. You don't need to know any of these other parts of the cerebellum. All right, and so we've got gray matter, white matter. There are folds of the cerebellar cortex. These are called folia. That means leaf. That's its origin. All right, and then the midline of the cerebellum is called the vermis, and that is connecting the two cerebellar hemispheres. So just like the cerebrum, the cerebellum is also split into two hemispheres, the right and left. So here's a mid-sagittal cross-section of that cerebellum. So all out here is where that the cerebellar cortex would be, sorry. And then deep inside is going to be the white matter or arbor vitae. Arbor means tree, so you can kind of see how there's this like tree-like structure in here, and that's usually going to be represented with white paint on a lot of the models for lab. And then this is an actual image of a cross-section of a brain with that cerebellum highlighted there at the back. You can see the pons right here, but that is the cerebellum, and so you can see all of this white matter here forming that arbor vitae. And then here, again, we've got that mid-sagittal section, and then here's a superior view of basically an unrolled cerebellum, so kind of stretching it out a little bit so it's not so bunched together. But this is further divided into some other regions. So again, that midline, the vermis, again, is for integrating the two hemispheres. It's also going to help compare visual information. It's really important for equilibrium and proprioceptive feedback to help maintain our balance and coordinate all of our movements like walking and stuff like that. So this is a really important integration area. So it'll connect those two hemispheres again, and each hemisphere, right and left, are going to have the anterior lobe and posterior lobe separated by a primary fissure. We're not seeing those shown on this particular image, but they will be there. And so the hemispheres are mostly for planning motor function that will also integrate with the frontal lobe of the cerebrum. And that information will all pass through the thalamus and stuff like that. And so this is all a lot, again, of that movement and stuff like that. So being able to have us move, walk, and process that balance again, because that's really important for our ability to walk. All right, we're going to wrap up this video talking about the limbic system. And you may have heard of the limbic system before, but this is a collection of different structures in the cerebrum and diencephalon that are all involved in emotion and motivation and memory that's associated with emotions. So there's three main structures recognized in this system. The cingulate gyrus, this is located within the longitudinal fissure that's above the corpus callosum, so it'll kind of wrap around the diencephalon. Then we have the hippocampus. This is the nucleus that's shaped kind of like a seahorse. Different way of seeing a seahorse. I'll show you an image here in a couple slides, but hippocampus does mean seahorse. And then the amygdala, which is connected into the hippocampus. All right, so here's kind of that mid-sagittal cut again. So here's the cingulate gyrus. This is going to be sitting around where that corpus callosum is. This is the corpus callosum right here. In this purple structure, that's going to be the hippocampus. So I'll show you a comparison as to how that is supposed to look like a seahorse. I don't really see it personally, but I did find a helpful image. And then the amygdala is right here connected to that hippocampus. And so then you can see right in here where that diencephalon is going to be with the thalamus and hypothalamus and pituitary gland and stuff like that. So again, this is for emotions and memory related to emotions and stuff. So this cingulate gyrus is, again, located within the longitudinal fissure. Its main job is to focus our attention on events that are emotionally important. Hippocampus is going to be really important in forming memories and storing them long term. And then the amygdala is connected into that hippocampus and is involved in a lot of different parts of our emotional processing and memory, but especially fear. So people sometimes, this is not particularly common, but if people have damage to the amygdala, sometimes they can have a really difficult time with emotional processing, and they might not feel fear anymore depending on the type of damage that's been done. Again, this is really rare, so there's not a lot of information about it out there, but I have heard of cases where people had their amygdala damaged and they ended up no longer being afraid of anything, but they also had a lot of other emotional effects too, which can cause some different challenges within their lives. All right, and it's going to also help encode memories that are based on the emotions that are occurring at that particular time that the memory is being formed. All right, so these are all really important structures. So something not discussed in the textbook, but I do want to mention right here is certain neurodevelopmental disorders like ADHD and autism. These can cause differences in how these structures look, so they might not develop the way that they normally would, and that can impact people's ability to process memories and emotions and stuff like that. So one of the hallmark features of ADHD is emotional dysregulation, so having struggles with regulating their emotions, and that has to do with both the limbic system and parts of the frontal lobe, it's the prefrontal cortex and stuff like that, and so their integration can present some challenges in individuals who have those types of neurodevelopmental disorders, and that's not an exhaustive list. There's lots of other neurodevelopmental disorders that can cause very, very similar symptoms. But I did want to mention that here just to kind of get a bit more of a real world connection in. So here's that image I was talking about. So this is what the hippocampus looks like if we were to remove it out of the brain. Here's a seahorse. So hopefully that helps a little bit. I know if we look at this image, it's really hard to kind of visualize that looking like a seahorse, but maybe this makes it a little easier. I still think that Diencephalon and Brainstem look a lot more like a seahorse than the hippocampus does, but hopefully that helps. And we will continue the next video talking about cranial nerves.